Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on RightClick Tools Active Directory Cleanup Dashboard. Thank you so much for attending. My name is Chelsea. I'm on the marketing team here at Recast, and I'll go through a brief introduction and then hand it over to our speakers today for a deep dive into the dashboard. First off, this webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending the link out early next week with this recording, along with the two other webinars we have this week. So you'll get all of those. We'll start with a brief introduction of RightClick Tools for those that may be newer to using them or maybe not as familiar. We have three pillars of RightClick Tools. The first one is improved productivity. And many of you are familiar with the free tools or the community edition of the tools. Know that we offer many shortcuts within ConfigMan that help to save a lot of time. Another core pillar of the tools are actionable insights. This relates to the 5 dashboards within the tools that help to surface data on compliance levels and pair it with tools to take immediate actions on vulnerabilities that you find. So this 5-part webinar series is really focused on this pillar, the actionable insights. Our third pillar is automation. And we have a full automation suite within the console that can be used to automate many tasks. And we also have a tool called Kiosk Manager, which is used to lock down single-purpose devices such as computer labs and digital signage. So that's all, kind of under our automation pillar. The dashboard you will see today, along with the other 4 in this series, are part of our Enterprise Edition. A quick look at our customer list. You likely see some familiar logos. We have hundreds of enterprise customers that have really gotten a lot of value out of the dashboards you will see today and then over the next several days. So we really wanted to take a deep dive into each one of them. So introducing our speakers for today, we have Mark Godfrey, who's a software engineer at Recast and has done extensive work on the dashboard you will see today, along with many others. We also have Marty Miller. He's our customer success manager. He makes sure customers get onboarded correctly. He does regular trainings and answers technical questions for our customers. So with that, if you do have questions, he will be handling all the Q&A. Please submit your questions into the Q&A section of Zoom, and we'll either get those answered as you submit them, or at the end of the webinar, we will have time for Q&A as well after Mark goes through a walkthrough of the product. So with that, I will hand it over to Mark for the product walkthrough.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Chelsea. All right, so as Chelsea already said, today we're going to talk about our Active Directory Cleanup Tool dashboard. That name is actually indicative of one of the 2 primary use cases I always like to talk about, cleaning up Active Directory. And we don't really call it a Configuration Manager cleanup tool, of course, because Configuration Manager, as you should know, has its own built-in cleanup tasks. So after devices are inactive for X period of time, it'll automatically purge those items from Configuration Manager. But then you'll see those are often left over in Active Directory, and that can mess with reports and other things and just kind of make your environment cluttered. Sometimes you want to get that cleaned up. The other major use case I really like to talk about is making sure you're managing everything. You might find out, and we'll show you this in a moment as I go through how to use the dashboard, that you have devices that are in Active Directory that are not old and stale. They're actually currently being used, and they're not in Configuration Manager. And that's a big problem, right? Because if you don't have your client on there, you're not managing them, they're not getting software updates, you're not applying all your configuration profiles. You might have configuration drifts to worry about, security related or otherwise. It's a big deal. So we want to make sure we can identify those so we can fix those issues. So first things first, you'll see here it's got some filtering stuff at the top. The domain area here will automatically populate with whatever domain the user who logged into the console is in. If you do have multiple domains and you want to choose a different one, some people don't realize this is actually an editable field. So you can actually go in here and type in a different domain if you want to kind of look that way. Then once you have your new domain, you can hit refresh OUs. It'll populate all this data for the OUs and collections. And you're going to want to choose an Active Directory OU and a Configuration Manager device collection. And your goal should be to choose OUs and collections that are as closely resembling each other as possible. Because if you choose, say, workstations for an OU and like a server collection, you're not going to properly match up the devices you're looking for, and you're not going to be able to properly do what this tool needs you to do. If you need to, you can actually make a collection that actually will, I think there's a system OU names property on SMSR system where you can actually make a collection that's literally designed to look for devices in a specific OU. Otherwise, you could always, if you have a smaller environment, I probably wouldn't do this on hundreds of thousands of devices, but if you cleared out this OU field and selected all systems, it would just scan all of both environments. But again, that would be a little slow depending on the size of your environment. So anyways, I already scanned this one here. And this environment is our a somewhat newer development environment. It's actually fairly clean. I was actually fairly surprised going through this to see that we do have an item that's only in Active Directory. So what you can do is once you see this chart, you can click on one area of the pie chart and the data grid below will update with the data based on what you've clicked. And you'll see at the column headers here, it pulls in data from both Active Directory and Configuration Manager. I actually remembered looking at this that we should probably update this because it still says SCCM instead of MEMCM, so I have to make a note on that one. But you can look at a lot of these things to determine which of these use cases that you need to take action on. So I'm going to click on this item. It's only in Configuration Manager. I'm sorry, only in Active Directory. If I had something only in Configuration Manager, it would show that as looks like a yellow pie chart slice. So I have this device here. I can look at the AD last logon timestamp, and I see this one was fairly recent. If this timestamp was something like, say March or February, that might indicate to me, hey, this is a stale device. We need to do something about this. And depending on your individual practices, I guess, for offboarding hardware, you might right-click and go to Console Tools, and you can delete the device from Active Directory or from Configuration Manager, depending on where it is and where you want to remove it from. Or you might have other procedures, in which case we have a tool called RCT Builder. You can run that from the devices node, make a little workflow. So you could have it where it like disables the device and moves it to a special OU or something like that. That also might be nice if you suspect something's like lost or stolen, because there might be various data points on the objects that you are going to want later on when you're trying to locate that device. So just deleting it might actually negatively impact that. But if it's just old devices you want to remove, by all means use this. So in this case, we're seeing, hey, this isn't an old item, right? This is a newer item. So my concern with this would be, why is this not showing up? And most of the time, that's because your discovery methods need to be refined, right? So I could always just go over here into administration, discovery methods, pull up my AD system discovery, and just add that OU that item's in to make sure it's getting pulled in. In the unlikely event that it is still there, you probably have something else going on. That's a whole bunch of log reading that we're not getting into today. But most of the time, you just need to, add a new. You just browse the path and select a new OU and check your boxes and add it, and that should fix that problem. So we'll go back here. The other nice thing about this is in all of our dashboards, when you go down to the data grid, you noticed before where I right-clicked and referenced these two tools, but all of our other tools on here as well. So if you see a device and you're wanting to locate it and figure out what's going on, you can always run some of these tools to help you identify what's going on with those. One other thing I wanted to mention is how this thing matches the data from Configuration Manager and Active Directory. We've actually changed it a little bit due to some feedback from some customers. It used to match primarily on just the name of it, but we had some issues where some customers had multiple domains, and depending on if they had FQDN, use FQDN enabled or not in their settings, it could get a little confusing. So now what it'll do is it'll primarily try to match on AD distinguished name, since that's a very unique field. And then if it can't match a device on AD distinguished name, then it'll fall back to the old method of matching on the name. And if it still can't match on that, then it's going to just basically show it as, hey, this is only in one system or the other. So just a couple of tips on that. The other frequent issue that we see with a lot of customers, I think I mentioned trying to match the OU and the collection. Let me show you real quick what happens if I select, say, Recast servers for a collection and workstations for the OU. It's not going to find anything in both, right? Because these are completely different sets of data I'm looking at. And that's why that doesn't work. So if you're having troubles with that, like I said, try to match these as closely as possible, and you're going to have a much better look to this. If you have any other use cases on this dashboard, feel free to share it. As I mentioned earlier, the primary use case when this was created was for cleaning up Active Directory, and we later on realized, this has another great use case of managing, making sure you're managing all your devices. So by all means, let us know how you love this. Be sure to share it in chat as well as with any other questions you might have. One thing I forgot to mention was we have this export to CSV button down here. When you click this thing, it's going to ask you if you want to only export the filter data or all of the data. The filter data being what's showing in the data grid based on what you clicked. So if you hit yes, it'll export just that. No, will export all of the data. And then it'll give you a file save dialog, and you'll just type in choose the location, type in the file name, and it'll save as a CSV, which you can then look at in Excel, send to a manager, or whatever you need to do with that data. So I am going to pass you back on to Chelsea. You should be able to help you from here.
Great, thank you, Mark. So this will be one of the shorter webinars we'll have, but as mentioned, this is a series. We have four other dashboards coming up that we'll go over in depth, where you'll hear from the actual developers of the tools. So tomorrow we have the software update deployment status presented by Brian Dam. He's another software engineer here. And then Mark will be presenting again on Thursday. He'll be covering the hardware and firmware audit dashboard. And then next week, rounding out the series on Wednesday, we'll go over our lapse compliance dashboard. Our CTO, Chris Muster, will go over that. And then finally, the BitLocker compliance next week on Thursday will be presented by Mark again. And for those that are community users, if you wanted to test drive the tool, you can do so by downloading the latest 4.2 release from our site. Simply click the download tools button on any page on our site and fill out the form. You'll get a link to the download the tools, and you get 30 days to try out all of the dashboards, along with several other enterprise tools that we have to offer. And so please, sign up for other webinars if it's of interest. And with that, we will move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Please submit your questions in the Q&A section. And we'd also love to hear from any of you, like current customers or those that have tried out this tool, what other use cases you have for it. It's always, really helpful to hear from those that, are using the tools every day, to hear other use cases within the community.
All right, very good. Thank you, Chelsea. This is Marty Miller, and I am the Customer Success Manager, and I'm the guy who put those additional objects into Active Directory that popped up for Mark. That was a test, and it really wasn't meant to mess with him, I promise. It just worked out that way. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. If you come up with anything else, please feel free to add. So here's the first question. Is there a way to create and publish via a link or email a report of this data? What we have right now for exporting the data would be that create a CSV file that you saw down at the bottom of the tool there, the dashboard. We don't have a specific way or a better way to export that data at this time. It's a good point to mention on our however, that on our website, if you are interested in adding a feature or want to see a feature that we currently don't have, you can absolutely go to the feature request page and add that feature request, or you can search for that feature request and potentially go ahead and vote that up, essentially. And then it's one of those things that we will consider all good ideas. So very good. The next question, does that only show AD objects that haven't been disabled in Active Directory? That's an excellent question, and I'm actually going to call Mark to see if he can help out on this one.
Absolutely. It should show devices whether or not they're enabled or disabled.
Perfect. Very, very good.
Well, sorry, to add on to that, what I usually recommend is for most folks where disabling an object is part of your offboarding scenario is I usually recommend moving it to a slightly different OU and then just not scanning that OU as part of this. And that might help refine that data better if you're having an issue with disabled devices showing up in these reports.
All right, another question. What do customers typically do with objects only showing up in SCCM but not in Active Directory? Add them to Active Directory. If you have items that are only showing up in SCCM and not Active Directory, that's definitely something that you're going to want to take a look at and try and determine why that would be happening. Obviously, something like a workstation PC, if you have workstation PCs that aren't connected to Active Directory in your environment, those are going to show up as not being in Active Directory, but that's actually intentional.
Do you mean work group PCs?
Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm sorry. Work group, yes, work group PCs, exactly. So those are going to show up in Active Directory, and that's completely intentional. You would probably want to determine why they're not in Active Directory before you just add them. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of up to you how you want to do it, something like that.
Yeah, typically most people, the way they get their devices into Configuration Manager from the beginning is basically by Active Directory discovery, or if it's like a clean image, obviously, then the client being installed will add a thing. What you might find is if say an object's been deleted from Active Directory, deleted from Configuration Manager, but someone didn't turn it off, then Heartbeat Discovery pulls it back in, and it might just be, hey, this is a device that it's sitting in a closet in a tech room, and someone forgot to turn it off after decommissioning it. I've actually seen that a surprising amount of times, and that might be what's going on as well. So something to keep in mind.
We have the question, how long is the free trial version good for? So it is a 30-day trial. The thing just to mention is if you've used a previous 30-day trial, you may not have a 30-day trial that's still available to you. But if you reach out to our sales team, reach out to myself, we can get you to the right person to say, hey, if you really like to try them again, you absolutely do that. So just let us know. How does this tool manage environments with multiple domains? So I think Mark actually came up with a feature that I didn't even know existed when he was showing us this tool. Up in the top left, where it has the domain information, you should be able to type in a different domain than the one that it's showing there. And then you can click refresh OUs, and it should pull in the information from that domain as well. Looking at AD Cleanup Tool, I see that it is really dirty. Devices are either off or outside the domain since March. Does the tool work with Azure Premium Intune for off-site devices? So Azure Premium and Intune devices, it's, Mark, help me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing we're not pulling that information in, which is why we're seeing some dirtiness there.
We don't pull that in directly. So right now, we have some nice plans in the future where we really like to start integrating into a lot of the cloud products, but our support in that right now is rather limited. However, if you have Active Directory domain sync going on, then the Azure AD data would be accurate because that data would sync back down to your on-prem environment. So it just kind of depends on your configuration.
The question, so the cleanup tool is just for monitoring and pulling information. It is not able to make changes. So the dashboard is absolutely, you are correct in the fact that the dashboard is definitely showing you and giving you information on what is there. You can decide to take action on that however you like. Similarly, in the pie charts that actually pop up, you can click on those and it'll populate the devices that are part of that pie chart down at the bottom of the page, and you can do your RightClick Tools actions from those. So if you wanted to determine if a device really existed, maybe you see something that's not in AD but's in Configuration Manager and you wanted to run an action against it, RightClick Tools maybe ping it, then you absolutely could run the RightClick tool to ping it and see if that device actually exists or not. So you can definitely do RightClick Tools actions from the results that you get. There isn't a import all into AD or something like that, but you could, as you're doing the RightClick Tools, you can use them to make those actions happen. When SCCM is updated, well, the tools need to be reinstalled as well. Other types of add-ons I've used required a reinstall. Generally, when SCCM is updated and your config manager console updates, there shouldn't be a need to reinstall. There's just been, honestly, being the person who would deal with most of these, I've literally seen it once where it happened, that it needed to be reinstalled. Because of the way we're able to use the different variables and how SCCM console is installed, it does not require an additional install. My company already has the Active Directory cleanup tool installed. I scanned an OU with the tool. It's showing 9 devices in red. Do you have any documentation on what the colors indicate? If you're talking about the ones that would be in the pie chart, there should be a little description to the right-hand side of what those are. So that would be on the screen that we're showing right now, where it says if they're only in Config Manager, they would be that yellowish color up on the top. If they are in both, they'd be blue, and only in Active Directory is the red color. What version of SCCM can I use? So this should work with any version of SCCM that is currently supported by Microsoft. Is it possible to show an example of the RightClick Tools Builder Runner to show how you would move objects to another OU in the Active Directory? I don't know, Mark, do you have one of those set up by chance?
You don't. What I would recommend if you want to see that is if you look on our website under the sales area, you can actually schedule a full walkthrough of these tools with one of our sales associates, and they're actually fully trained on the product. And what they can do is they'll custom tailor this little walkthrough based on what you want to see, and they'd be more than happy to show you anything. And if you do come across something that might be a little too technical for them, they're always happy to ping one of our technical team to pull us in and help answer any of those questions for you.
If I automate a cleanup task, does that only run if I'm logged into the console, or do I need the RightClick Tools server set up? Automating things in RightClick Tools would need the the Recast management server to be set up in your environment. All of those tasks are basically controlled through that management server. So that's how those would run. So you would want to have a management server on that setup.
That was actually a change late last year with 4.0. Prior to 4.0, we did support scheduling automated tasks through just the RightClick Tool standalone, but it actually confused people because they would schedule something and then they'd go home and then it wouldn't run because, of course, their laptop would be off. So just to kind of make things a little more straightforward for folks, we implemented that requirement. So if you're confused because you used to do it that way and it no longer works that way, it changed for that reason, just FYI.
Question is, if computers are only in Config Manager, can you easily delete the SCCM machine? So things that are only in either Active Directory or Config Manager, you can do the RightClick Tools action to go ahead and delete either from Active Directory or Config Manager. This is something that I always tell everybody when I'm going through these tools, though, is that the RightClick Tools aren't going to give you permissions that you don't already have in Config Manager. So if you don't have permission to delete devices from Config Manager, you're not going to be able to do the RightClick tool to delete devices from Config Manager. If you're set up in our standard way, you can do things with service accounts that are a little bit more advanced, but generally it's not going to let you do anything more than you already have permission for. So just something to be aware of on there, but you absolutely can delete devices maybe that are orphaned in Config Manager that have been retired out of Active Directory and just haven't been, Config Manager just hasn't done their cleanup yet. Possibly.
Something to keep in mind though is if the device you're deleting is a currently active device and you have heartbeat discovery enabled, that could come back at a later date. So just keep that in mind. If it's something you're trying to get rid of and not want to come back, you want to make sure that thing's powered off as well, or the client's uninstalled.
Is there a way to use this tool to find servers and workstations that show inactive or device is none? Since what Mark is doing is trying to see if we have a field for that.
It's interesting. I see that and I'm like, that would actually be really great to add. Like, is this thing inactive? We have whether or not the client's installed. Actually, I'm looking at this and for some reason I'm not seeing the last check-in time populating, which might be a bug. I'm going to make a note of the last check-in time, but that should show you, give a little indication of how active the device is. If you're talking about in terms of activity, where is it? Somewhere up here it flags it. Oh, right here. It'll flag as inactive, like the client activity one. I think that's a great idea to add if you want to go to our feature request page and add that. Publish out for people to vote it up. That's a great idea and something that we could definitely look at adding in the future for you.
Can you push the client to machines only in Active Directory from the dashboard, or do you have to make a collection to push it to? Right, when the list that you have down here, if you right-click on it, has the RightClick Tools actions that you can run, and you probably notice that the install client is not a RightClick Tools action. That's just a regular. Config manager action. So what I would do, like you mentioned, would go ahead and add this to a collection then that you could do the install client from.
We do have a feature request, now that you mention it, for adding the install client action, because even though on the devices node it has that by default, there are places like this, nested in our other tools where you might want to do that from. So I would actually suggest if you go to that feature request page, which Chelsea linked in the chat, and you can search for client install and just vote that thing up, and we can look at adding that.
Do you have an option to delete a device from AD and Config Manager at the same time, or is it two separate actions, like delete both? Right now it is two separate actions. So you would be deleting it from one, and then you would be deleting it from the other.
You use Builder to make one to do both, but yeah, that might be an interesting case to add something to delete them together.
So what's the easiest way to check which version of the SCCM client we are using? So we definitely have a client information tool. If you right-click on a device, you can go to client information to find out more information about the clients that are on the machine. So that, like, there should show client version that's running as well.
It looks like we have a question on getting a link to the other webinars. I just posted that into the chat, so you can go ahead and sign up for the other 4 webinars if you haven't already. That's it for the questions coming in. Again, thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you on another webinar either this week or next week. Thanks so much.